Hello everyone. Welcome to the webinar Under the Dragon's Shadow, China's Actions in Tibet, Hong Kong and Xinjiang, that is East Turkestan. This webinar is jointly organized by Lokmanya and Center for Advanced Strategic Studies, Pune. I am Gauri Nulkar Oak, founder of Lokmanya. Today we are honored to partner with CAS on our very first event. I am especially thankful to Director of CAS, Air Marshal Gokhale sir, and Deputy Director of CAS, Major General Mahajan sir, for their support and for being here with us today. In the audience, many accomplished writers, researchers, academicians, corporate leaders, and intellectuals from all over the world. And I extend a warm welcome to all of you. Before we begin, I would like to say just a few words about Lokmanya. Lokmanya is a bilingual multimedia platform aiming to highlight the stories of India and its neighborhood, stretching from the Middle East to Southeast Asia and from the IOR to Central Asia. At Lokmanya, we have three goals. One is to connect individuals, communities and cultures within India and its neighborhood through one of the most powerful forms of content, which is stories. Two, to take complex topics and ideas to maximum people through simple and engaging content. And three, we wish to expand policy discourse beyond New Delhi and give rest of India a stronger voice. Lokmanya is much more than just a media platform, and there are several ways in which we can interact and collaborate with you. If you wish to know more, please drop us a line at contact@lokmanya.com. We will be posting the email address in the chat window to your right. Now a couple of things about the webinar. Towards the end of the webinar, we will be having an audience Q&A session, for which I would request you that if you have any questions for our speakers, please post them in the chat window to the right on your screen, and we will do our best to cover as many questions as possible. Now, without taking any more time, I would like to invite Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale to give us the opening address. Gokhale sir is former Vice Chief of Air Staff and currently the Director of CAS Pune. Sir, over to you.
It's indeed a privilege for me to join in for this webinar that Lokmanya is co-hosting with us. I have along with me General Mahajan, who is also the Deputy Director of Center for Advanced Strategic Studies, which is based in the University of Pune. As you know, it is one of the first think tanks outside Delhi, and we're very proud that having been established in 1992, we have a number of programs and events that we have taken part in over the years. This particular event is of course very important, and at the outset, let me welcome Mr. Salih Hudayar, the Honorable Prime Minister of East Turkistan Government in Exile. He is from, at the moment, in Washington, so good morning to you, sir. Mr. Craig Choi, lawyer by profession and is a convener of Progressive Lawyer Group. He is from Hong Kong actually, but at the moment in exile in Washington. So again, a good morning to you, Craig. And Ms. Tashi Shodong, she is in Dharamshala from Tibet Policy Institute. Welcome to you, ma'am. We also have, I think, one of our leading experts in India, and all of you must have seen him many times on televisions. That is Mr. Jaydev Granaday, who will be giving us a keynote address. We also have Namrata Hasija, who will be coordinating the interviews and Q&As with all the speakers. So let me start the ball rolling by saying a few words about this particular dragon in the room. As you know, India and the People's Republic of China started almost the same time. India got independence in 1947 and People's Republic of China was formed October 1949. We both, of course, were very friendly because both had suffered from colonization, and that is how I think India was one of the first countries to recognize People's Republic of China. But within 1 year, PRC started showing their colors of expansionism, and they annexed Tibet exactly almost a year after their establishment in October 49, and October 50 they invaded Tibet, and thereafter in June they took over the entire control of Tibet. And thereafter, of course, His Holiness Honorable Dalai Lama had to come to India, and of course we are very enriched by his presence here in Dharamshala. In 62, we suffered again at the expansionist ideas of China in the war that we had. And thereafter, all of you are very aware of that in the recent past, this one belt, one road, or war, or whichever names that people call it by, Chinese are actually expanding their territories by giving debts, making countries indebted, unable to pay back, and then they are taking over, whether it's ports or airports or whether it is any other real estate, for hundreds of years. And these countries are in real dire shape, paying back the interest. It's happening in Pakistan, it's happening in Sri Lanka, it's happening in many other places. And so this, what actually China fought against colonization is actually doing exactly in the reverse. And now we have with us today the Honorable Prime Minister, Salih Hudayar. As you know, we see a number of repressive kind of videos and pictures from the concentration camps, the kind of brutalities that are, on these people who are there in Xinjiang. And of course, I'm sure he will speak more about it. But we really feel bad that these human rights violations are carried on and nobody actually raises much of voice against it. And so is the case with Hong Kong, we notice, and we have got Mr. Craig Choi who will be speaking. We know that there was a treaty and 100 years were yet to be over, but they started off with this so-called national security law. We saw the kind of unrest that is going on, and we really feel bad about this entire thing because it's not the question of democracy, but it's also again the human rights and of course the violations and the kind of repression that they're doing on their own people there. So I'm very glad that we have a speaker all the way from Washington. And then of course, Tashi, I must mention to you that this morning, I just going through some of the alerts, or rather in the evening, and I found there was the person who's in charge of TAR, as they call it, his name is Wu Yangxi, from the Communist Party of China. He said that we must defeat the forces of His Holiness Dalai Lama. Of course, he don't say His Holiness, but that is the way, he starts off. And then exactly same His Holiness, look at the difference of, the people. Just an hour or two ago, he mentioned good health to Prime Minister Abe of Japan, who is at the moment ailing and is wanting to, come down from his office. So look at the kind of, personalities that we have across. We're very glad that, again, from on the Tibetan perspective, we will have Tashi speaking to us. There is one good thing that I must mention, that I think on 20th of January this year, the US Congress has passed a bill about Tibetan policy and support. So I don't know how much traction it will have, but hopefully we will see something happening in the near future. And with this, I want to quickly introduce to you, of course, a very distinguished China analyst, that is Mr. Jaydev Granaday. He's a former Additional Secretary in the Government of India, and he is a known security intelligence expert, a seasoned China analyst with over 25 years of experience in the field. His foreign assignments include a stay in Hong Kong, Beijing, and has also been a minister in the Indian Embassy at Washington, D.C. He is currently the president of Center for China Analysis and Strategy in New Delhi. Along with him, of course, you have Namrata Hasija, who works also in the CCAs. So with this, few words from my side, may I request Jaydev Granaday to please give the keynote address. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Air Marshal Gokhale, for inviting me here, and Ms. Gauri Dulkar Oak for inviting me, both of you, on behalf of the CASS and the Lokmanya organization, to speak particularly on this topic, which I think is very current and which has attracted the attention of people all over the world, particularly at this juncture when so much is happening in in China, behind the bamboo curtain, as they put it. So let me just, in the few minutes that I have, try and paint a picture of what is happening inside China and how it impacts all of us. And when I say all of us, I mean all the speakers and the audience. China itself has been going through a fairly difficult time for some years now, particularly with their reforms, with their trying to switch from an export-led economy to one promoting domestic consumption. This has led to a lot of unemployment, to closure of factories, to closure of small mines, and to the shutting down of various restaurants. In the midst of this, their new leader, Xi Jinping, he introduced a range of policies, primarily intended, of course, to weed out opposition to him, and secondly, to weed out corruption, the anti-corruption campaign. What we are seeing in China is the most sustained campaign that has been undertaken ever in the People's Republic of China against corruption. It has seen by September 2017 over 170 odd officers of the rank of Major General and above in the People's Liberation Army being dismissed. It has seen over 175 cadres of the rank of Vice Minister, which is equivalent to the Secretary to the Government of India, dismissed, all on charges of corruption, and over 1 million other party members and cadres. This is across the board. But of course, the question is, has corruption stopped? It hasn't. It is still going on. In fact, in a very, I think, timely release, Al Jazeera just 3 days ago published a report indicating that there are 500 Chinese who have acquired what are called golden passport of Cyprus, which means you have to invest about 2.5 million euros in order to get those passports, and there are 500 Chinese officials in them. Many of them have been named. So this is what Xi Jinping has unleashed. He has also brought in a policy for reducing ostentatious consumption or curbing ostentatious consumption, and that, mind you, by itself has led to a drop in GDP output by between 3 to 5%. So you can imagine the amount of consumption that was going on public funds. All that he has tried to curb. It has gained him a lot of popularity, but within the Chinese Communist Party and its establishment, of course, it hasn't been very well received. But actually, China's difficulties have mounted since, I would say, March 2018, which was when the Party Congress finished and the accompanying National People's Congress, where Xi Jinping ignored the prescribed informal regulations imposing term limits on promotion of senior cadres and for occupying certain posts like that of president, and promoted people. That led to a lot of discontent, including in the Chinese Communist Party. Let's not forget that around 30 to 35% of serving Chinese Communist Party members in the Central Committee have been through the Cultural Revolution, or as they put it, have suffered the Cultural Revolution, and they have said they don't want a return to the old authoritarian ways of a one-man rule like under Mao Zedong. So they were very clear about it. There has been a lot of protest from students, from academics, etc. All this has been magnified by the very strict and progressively restrictive security measures that Xi Jinping has been introducing. These are intended, in fact, to control society. And let me only mention one of them, which is the social credit management system. It's an amazing system that combines AI and other technologies. And in that, there is a 360, as they say, 360-degree review of every individual in China. And the program is supposed to be in force by the end of this year, by the end of 2020. And this means, this implies that a person's relatives, friends, neighbors, subordinates, seniors, friends banks, businesses would all comment on him, and he would then be given a number by the party which will determine where he stays, which schools his children go to, if any, how he can travel, whether he can travel, and if he travels, whether he can go by rail or by air, whether he goes by first class or not. All that is going to be determined by that one number. And the same thing, of course, will carry on for his child. So obviously, people are very upset by this kind of a restriction which is being brought in. But China's problems got magnified even further. And the trigger for that was Xi Jinping's declaration at the 19th Party Congress of the goals for China over the next few years. So he laid down the China dream to be achieved by the 100th year of the founding of the Chinese Communist Party, that is 2021. And the China dream was to make the Chinese people wealthy, which is doubling of their per capita income, to make the Chinese nation strong and prosperous. And here is the most ominous part of it, which is to effect or bring about the rejuvenation of the great Chinese nation. Now, this last bit actually means the recovery of territories which they feel were lost through the imposition of unequal treaties by hostile foreign powers. It has a direct impact, of course, on many countries, many of China's neighbors, and especially us. We look at particularly Arunachal, bits of the central part of the border, like in Himachal Pradesh, and Ladakh, being immediately affected since China has laid claim to them. So this was one plan. The second, he said, was made in China by 2025, which is to put China on par with the world's most advanced technology powers. And then he said his final aim or final goal was to make China a major power with pioneering global influence. In other words, to be able to create or influence international organizations that are in existence. Translated, that means to put China on par with, or if not overtake, the United States of America. And that was by 2049, which is again not very far away. That is the 100th year of the founding of the People's Republic of China. Now, these declarations at the 19th Party Congress were the trigger for the US-China trade war, which started shortly after March 2018, and where we saw a series of tough measures being taken by the United States. The United States' central aim was not trade, it was to contain China's rise and to prevent it from becoming a threat. And therefore, they very deliberately targeted what is today probably the single most vital factor in a country's growth and development, which is technology. And they targeted Made in China 2025. The first target was one of the champions of China's IT sector, which is ZTE. The manner in which the United States went about it, it's almost bankrupted that company. The next was Huawei, which is the number one technology company of China. It's been brought down to its knees, and as of this September, they will stop manufacturing the smartphones, and they're going to find it even more difficult as time goes on to even complete the 5G rollout with in the absence of wafers, microchips, imaging chips, etc., that can only be sourced from 3 or 4 companies around the world, and all are dependent on US permission to sell them. The United States has also, in this process, been targeting the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, Mike Pompeo has on various occasions, and particularly in his speech at the Nixon Library Center, singled out China's desire to impose communist ideology on the world as something that has to be prevented. And this has, shall I say, sent the jitters through the Chinese Communist Party. This, along with 2 other sanctions that came in. One was a sanction against Chinese officials actively involved in the formulation of repressive policies or in their implementation in initially Xinjiang later extended also to Hong Kong. And the second is still only a proposal, but it has sent shockwaves through the Chinese Communist Party, and that was to ban any Chinese Communist Party member from getting a US visa. Now, as you all know, many of them joined the party in order to get the benefits, in order to travel abroad, particularly to the United States, or to send their children there. Many of them have assets in the United States, in Australia or Canada, which have suddenly now become vulnerable in case the US actually makes this proposal a law. But China itself, apart from these considerations, has also been very troubled. I won't go into details because we have three eminent speakers who will talk about it. But if we look at it, since the time China became the People's Republic of China, which is 70 years now, there has been rioting initially, but restiveness consistently in the Tibet Autonomous Region and in the other parts of Tibet, which have now been merged into other provinces. There has been trouble, unceasing trouble, in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, and of late, troubles have erupted in Mongolia. And all these are part of the People's Republic of China. China also upheld a principle called one country, two systems, with which they hoped to entice Hong Kong and Taiwan to become part of China. Hong Kong they finally got because of the lease agreement that had been signed many years ago with Britain. But what we are all seeing is that the Hong Kong people, after reverting to China, are now saying they don't want any part of it. They want to opt out. The national security laws seem to again have triggered a lot of problems, and there is a lot of agitation there. People have recently escaped from Hong Kong, gone to UK, USA, etc. But I'm sure we'll hear more about that later. And finally, the Taiwan. Taiwan has made it very clear, particularly after the Hong Kong problems, after the national security law was enacted, saying that they are not going to accept the one country, two systems. So China's grand plan for the rejuvenation of the great Chinese nation seems to have a big question mark on it, and it is unlikely, in my view, for them to be able to achieve it by 2021. India certainly is not going to allow them a free pass as far as our territories are concerned. Let me finish on one note, which is that even if we look at the map of China, just Tibet and Xinjiang together account for half of the Chinese land area. So that is the extent of trouble in the People's Republic of China, which is going on. The troubles have been magnified. There is a lot of uncertainty. Tensions are very high right now between the US and China, with the introduction of the menace of possible military conflict in the South China Sea. So what we are seeing is a very uncertain time ahead, not only for China, but for its neighbors. And let me conclude by looking a bit at the internal scene and saying that this uncertainty is also there on Xi Jinping's continuance in office. Because I think if push comes to shove, over a period of time, the Chinese Communist Party, if it finds the pressure from the United States becoming too much, they might even suggest that Xi Jinping eases out after his term ends and someone else comes in. So on this note, I'll end my comments here, and I look forward to listening to the other speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I am Amol Gok. I am an author with Lokmanya. We'll move ahead with our panel discussion now. Once again, thank you so much, Granaday sir, for giving us this insight into China's policies. It was great listening to you. So about the panel discussion, we have first and foremost our representative from East Turkestan, Mr. Saleh Hudayar, the Honorable Prime Minister of the East Turkestan government in exile. He is also the leader of the East Turkestan National Awakening Movement, and he is based in the US. Our representative from Hong Kong is Mr. Craig Choi, a qualified lawyer from Hong Kong. He has been one of the conveners of the Progressive Lawyers Group, which has been at the forefront in Hong Kong's struggle to preserve its values of democracy, freedom, rule of law, and independence of judiciary from the onslaught of China. Our representative for Tibet is Ms. Tashi Chodan, a researcher with the Tibet Policy Institute based in India. Her research areas are Tibetan Diaspora and gender studies, with a special focus on Tibetan women inside Tibet. For moderating this session, we have Ms. Namrata Hasija, who is a research associate with Center for China Analysis and Strategy. She is also the president of Taiwan Alumni Association of India and specializes in Chinese foreign policy and India-Taiwan relations. Over to you, Namrata.
Thank you, Amok, and I would like to thank the Center for Advanced Studies, Pune and Lokmanya for organizing this very well-timed seminar, especially having representatives from Tibet, Hong Kong, and Xinjiang to enlighten us on the ground realities that are there. And I think after Mr. Granaday's introduction, there's very much, there's nothing left for me to kind of give an introduction to what we are going to speak today. But yes, with the recent, as Mr. Granaday pointed out, with the recent policies, especially the way the Chinese Communist Party came up with the national security law, which was, I think, definitely coming because since last year we have been seeing a lot of protests happening in Hong Kong and also Tibet. They have systematically how the Chinese Communist Party, if I could use the words that His Holiness Dalai Lama used, that a cultural genocide has been happening in Tibet for over the years, where the Chinese Communist Party has kind of made sure that they are able to dilute, and they have specially targeted the monks and nuns, Tibetan monks and nuns, to kind of impact their culture and the diversity that the Tibetans had. And lastly, Xinjiang, of course, we have seen over the years how the Chinese Communist Party has, come up with different policies that have not only, like especially where a party, like in Tibet, there's a cadre party member to overlook, overlook the whole village. But in Xinjiang, the cadre is actually supposed to stay in your house. So he shares your house. He's there 24/7. So you are under surveillance 24/7. So that kind of, surveillance is there in Xinjiang. So I think I will not take much time, and I would start, with the speakers who are the eminent speakers here, who will kind of throw more light and especially what is happening on ground. And I would start with Honorable Prime Minister Saleh Hudayar, who's representing East Turkistan. So my first question to you would be that CCP's portrayal of being a multi-ethnic society on one hand, and but the way it has tried to repress religious and ethnic diversity in Tibet and Xinjiang, could you please highlight how CCP has systematically used policies for this repression, and to what extent in Xinjiang?
Yes, firstly, thank you for giving me this opportunity to present this issue. I want to thank Lokmanya and the CAS of India for allowing this. So what China has been using, or the Chinese Communist Party has been doing for the past 7 decades really, is by promoting so-called ethnic unity. It's actually promoting Han Chinese domination. As we saw in Tibet, Tibetan culture, language, and identity has been largely eroded. This is something that they've been doing in East Turkestan as well. They eroded our language, our culture, and now they're engaging in a genocide where they're locking up over 3 million of our people in concentration camps, prisons, and labor camps, destroying our mosques, even taking away 500,000 of our children to send them to state-run orphanages and boarding schools to ensure that they become, quote, loyal Chinese citizens, end quote. China's the Chinese Communist Party's end goal is to create a state, or a Chinese state, or a China that is dominated purely by the Han Chinese, where there is no difference in ethnicity, religion, or culture.
Right. Mr. Craig, my first question to you would be that if you could throw some light on the national security law and its extraterritorial clause, because what intrigues everyone is how China can, how far-reaching this extraterritorial clause can be, and also how far-reaching can it, it actually be. What can China really, how it can implement this when it comes to people who have already, escaped to different countries? If you could throw some light on this aspect.
Right. The national security law actually promulgated by the Chinese government and Hong Kong government and on the 30th of June, year 2020. Before they promulgated this law, and actually no one in Hong Kong has actually read the law before. So everybody was actually caught on shock by the how wide these national security law can be. And under the law, there are 4 offenses. The first one is cessation, and then subversion, terrorist activities, and collusion with a foreign country or with external elements to endanger national security. The problems with this law is that the Hong Kong Bar Association, in its statement on 1st of July, year 2020, they actually make some comments about these offenses under the law. For example, like the cessation, they actually said that this gives rise to concern whether this might operate or prohibit mere speech or any peaceful advocacy, because cessation under the law can be committed with or without violence. And as to the subversion, the Bar Association also made a comment saying that they have the concern whether the media criticism or nitpicking might be caught under this provision. For the terrorist activities, the Bar Association also makes a comment saying that whether the prosecution must prove that the accused knew that the person receiving such services is a terrorist. And for the collusion with a foreign country or with external elements to endanger national security law, and the Bar Association also raised the concern that whether certain existing activities or academics, NGOs or media organizations which were lawful before or not unlawful before then might be outlawed by this provision. And the reason why the national security law is so controversial is that we can actually hear from some international leaders' responses to it. For example, for the UK Foreign Minister, Mr. Dominic Raab, and he made the comment saying that it is a clear and serious violation of the UK-China Joint Declaration, and with this, a violation of China's freely assumed international obligations under the Joint Declaration. And the US also, because in response to the national security law, take away the Hong Kong special status under the Hong Kong-US Policy Act. And another thing that's raised lots of concern is by the human rights lawyers is that the national security law overrides the basic laws of Hong Kong, the local domestic laws, and the international human rights law, for example, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And so, which means that the national security law will prevail in the event that any inconsistency with the local laws of Hong Kong. So the Bill of Rights ordinance in Hong Kong will also be undermined. So as to how far-reaching it can be, and under the law, actually is saying that not only it will apply to Hong Kong residents, it also applies to companies incorporated in Hong Kong. That will include subsidiaries or any company of a foreign corporation incorporated in Hong Kong. In another article of the National Security Law, it also states that this law will apply to any person who is not permanent resident of Hong Kong as well. So we can, after the passage of this national security law, we have heard that 2 US citizens been wanted by the Hong Kong police because of the national security law. So we can see that this national security law not only applying to the residents of Hong Kong, but also to other citizens who are not within the territory of Hong Kong or China. Thank you.
Okay. So my next question would again be to Honorable Prime Minister. How do you see in the future that Uyghurs in Xinjiang and also outside Xinjiang, how they can form a movement that could take shape of an international united front to fight against this repression that we just spoke about in Xinjiang, and do you see that the world and especially the Islamic countries supporting such a movement?
So, as far as the first question, we already have an international movement that has started, especially in the past few years, to highlight the cause, the East Turkestan cause, and the situation in East Turkestan. 2 years ago, not many people in the world knew about East Turkestan and the Uyghurs. However, with an intense information campaign being carried out across the world by our community, we've managed to inform the world about East Turkestan and the Uyghurs. And we hope that this will only, get better further, in countries like India and other countries across the Muslim world as well. However, the question are there any Muslim countries supporting this? Unfortunately, to be real, there is no Muslim country supporting this. Turkey might appear to be, supporting our cause historically, because Turkey is our brother. It's a Turkic nation, and that's where most of our people have fled to outside of Central Asia. However, in recent years, Turkey has been increasingly close with China. They've engaged in multi-billion-dollar deals and have remained silent on our plight. In some cases, they've even deported Uyghurs from Turkey back to China. And this is something that happened in 2019, where an Uyghur woman and 2 of her children were sent back, and she was subsequently sent to a concentration camp. Other Muslim countries, due to their economic ties with China, they are remaining silent. But however, as our Prime Minister of the first East Turkestan Republic stated back in 1933, there will be no help for us from the Muslim world. This is a reality that we must accept, and this is about almost 100 years ago he said this. So we must turn to other powers, to the great powers like India, to European powers, and ask them for support.
Thank you. Then I'll again come back to Mr. Craig. The companies, the international companies also, come under this law. Now, Hong Kong, as we all know, has always had this very flourishing economy. And whenever I talk to Mr. Granaday, who was posted there in Hong Kong, the way he tells me about Hong Kong, when I went there in 2018, it was definitely not the same. But I'm sure if we visit now after the national security law, it will definitely be far away from the way we all imagined Hong Kong and we expected Hong Kong to be. Now, what impact do you think, especially this national security law, is going to have on the flourishing economy of Hong Kong? Now, also we see that, especially they have said that you can buy only from the yellow shops, and all these clauses are there. And also, what impact will international companies who are operating in Hong Kong, how this law will kind of, have, just, please tell us a picture about the overall economy of Hong Kong, how it will impact that.
We'll talk about the local domestic economy first, and then I'll move on to some international companies, how they will be affected by this national security law. During the past year, Hong Kong protesters and supporters of the democracy, they formed this yellow economic circle in support of the democracy and freedom in Hong Kong. And after the passage of this national security law, we can see that a lot of these restaurants or supporters, they're actually withdrawing from this yellow economic circle because they are afraid that voicing out support to democracy or freedom in Hong Kong will be violation of the law. The thing is that there is a chilling effect. The chilling effect is so strong that people are so afraid that these restaurants are already taken down their decorations that are supporting the democracy. And apart from that, right before the passage of the national security law, we can see that there's some CCP, media, or individuals, they're asking why some big banks not expressing support of the national security law. And after they criticizing these financial institutions not voicing out, we can actually see the HSBC Standard Charter. That, some of these leaders came out to the media and say that they support the national security law. We can see that the companies in Hong Kong, they no longer have the right to be silent. They have to go out and to support some political agenda by the government. And apart from that, the American Chambers of Commerce between 6th of July and 9th of July, they have a survey and in response to this national security law. And 76% in total of them expressed concern of this new national security law, and 41% of them were extremely concerned. And they are also saying that some of them are actually considering to moving out of Hong Kong to other places to have their offices. And we can actually see that, for example, like New York Times, they lose a lot of staff outside Hong Kong, and then we also see that some big giant technology companies, for example, like Google and Facebook, they refuse to comply with the data access request by the government. And so we can actually see that the confidence of Hong Kong's among these international companies is actually shaken. And they are actually still assessing the impact of this national security law. And because of the national security law itself is quite vaguely defined. For example, under the Article 29 is about the collusion with a foreign country or with external elements to endanger national security law. There's a provision saying that if any person who steals, spies, obtains repayment, or unlawfully provides state secrets for a foreign country or an institution or organization or individual, it will be a violation of the law of the national security law. And the prominent lawyer and prominent law firm Allen Overy, they have there is an article written about understanding the China's state secrets law, and in that article, it actually talks about how wide and how broad these state secrets can be, and actually may include also some foreign companies passively accepting information in circumstances where they're in the position to be told favors or extra influence. So it can be very wide, and the other companies in Hong Kong or other foreign companies in Hong Kong should pay attention and should have more procedures or internal policies in order to comply with these national security laws. So I would say that the national security law, we are still assessing the impacts of that, and we still need to see that how the foreign companies to live with it under this law. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There is a question for Honorable PM East Turkestan. So the question is, radical Islamic nations such as Pakistan don't bother to take a stand against the human rights violations of the Uyghur Muslims, clearly for their political benefits. How important is it to gain support of these nations? Are they even expecting any change in coming future regarding the stand of these nations?
Honestly, historically, over the past 70 years, Pakistan has been very close with China. Many Muslim nations actually have been very close with China. They have not offered any type of support, any type of even solidarity in any way. In fact, most Muslim countries have sided with China, even praising China at the UN for the human rights atrocities and other crimes that it's committing against Uyghur and other Muslims in East Turkestan. And ideally, we would want this to change, but realistically, looking at the big picture, I don't think Pakistan's position will change anytime in the near future. I'm even looking at, the position of many Muslim countries. Um, Many of them, I don't think will change their position either. So, like I said before, even 100 years ago, when we first declared independence, our prime minister at that time, he recognized that we were not going to get any support from Muslim countries. Over the past 90 years, we haven't gotten any type of support or recognition from Muslim majority countries at all. In fact, it's been mostly Western countries that have opened their doors. In fact, when we fled, post 1949, when Communist China invaded and occupied East Turkestan, our people fled to India because we have a long history of cultural and economic exchange with India, and India was the first country to really open its doors and arms to us. Whereas in Pakistan, if you try to flee there, they'll either shoot you at the border or they'll capture you and sell you back to the Chinese.
Thank you. There's another question for Mr. Craig. Someone has posed a question. Didn't the people of Hong Kong realize in 1999 that China will ensure that Hong Kong be brought under Beijing totally in a few years and not wait for 50 years as promised?
I think at that time when Hong Kong was handed back to China in 1997, everybody still had this hope that the one country, two system will work, and people still hope that the life will be the same like before 1997. And that's why I think most people were still optimistic at that time and still believe that, maybe we can still live on our own lives and we still have lots of the protection. In fact, before the handover of Hong Kong, the British government passed a lot of these human rights related legislation in Hong Kong. For example, the privacy law and anti-discrimination laws in Hong Kong, and also the Bills of Rights in Hong Kong. They also try to protect Hong Kong human rights by other international treaties like the ICCPR, and so that Hong Kong human rights will be maintained after 1997. Unfortunately, of course, is that even though China has tried to promise that Hong Kong will have the 50 years change of our life, but it seems that it doesn't really come into realization after some years, at least at this moment. UK is of the view that this is a serious violation of the joint declaration.
Okay. I have two more questions from Honorable Prime Minister Saleh. So there is this question which says that the selfish nature of CCP is also displayed on rewriting of Uyghur history, calling them as settlers in East Turkestan, completely disregarding them as an indigenous population, as stated in CCP's white papers. So would you say, what would you say about that?
This is complete lies. If you look at the recent excavations of mummies and other historical artifacts in East Turkestan, you see that Uyghurs have had a presence in East Turkestan for thousands of years. In fact, according to our renowned Uyghur historian Turgan Almas, we have a history of well over 6,000 years within East Turkestan.
Okay. There is another question. The ethno-discrimination against the Uyghurs speak volumes regarding the oppression. CCP contradicts its unified multi-ethnic society claims. So do you think this othering of Uyghurs is driven by Han nationalism? Support of these nations? Are they even expecting any change in coming future regarding the stand of these nations?
So our dream to regain our independence is something that has pre-existed, since 1884, when the Manchu Qing dynasty invaded and occupied East Turkestan. East Turkestan was renamed to Xinjiang, meaning the new territory. In the 1920s, inspired by the Indian national independence movement, many of our students were actually studying there. In fact, our first Prime Minister of the East Turkestan Republic, he was actually in India when rebellion broke out in East Turkestan. our goal, is to regain and restore our independence. This is something that was driven not just by, the present Chinese regime, but by previous Chinese regimes who were engaging in colonialism and mass atrocities, which have, continued to this day, even though they claim to be different administrations. The KMT tried to invade and occupy East Turkestan, and we fought, against them. We declared independence briefly in 1933, but was crushed due to Soviet intervention. We declared independence again in 1944, and in 1949, again due to Stalin's intervention and support of Mao, East Turkestan was invaded and occupied by China. Our people have never given up our struggle to regain our independence, and the very fact that we want to get independence is why China is locking up millions of people in concentration camps. In fact, it's one of their top national defense goals in their latest national defense strategy is to prevent, the creation of East Turkestan and, to prevent the independence of Tibet.
Thank you. There's another question for Mr. Craig. The question is, given that China has defied and flouted international laws and conventions, be it the South China Sea and other issues, what are the other options the rest of the world has to ensure that it, complies with the international norms and rules?
I think this is a very interesting question because we can see that a lot of freedom-loving countries, they are trying to work together and to make sure that China is in compliance with this international treaty. For example, the Five Eyes together, and they have issued very strong statements about what China has been doing to Hong Kong. And I think that the freedom-loving countries, for example, India and Japan, and they should also join together to form a stronger voice to tell that we actually stand by freedom and human rights and democracy, to show that democracy and human rights is nothing endangering a nation. Actually, it will flourish nations like other countries like US and like a European country as well. So I think the most important now is that these countries to stand together and then voice out their opinion and then tell China that actually these human rights core values and universal values are actually benefiting the Chinese community and the Chinese people as well.
Thank you. So there's one general question. It is not directed to any of the speakers. So I think any of the speakers or even Mr. Granaday can take this question. The question is, can the scuttling of the Belt and Road Initiative bring China to its knees and drastically reduce its so-called influence in the global affairs?
I would like to answer this.
Yes, please.
Yes, removing, stopping the Belt and Road Initiative is actually should be a priority for all countries that promote democracy and that care about freedom and human rights. The Belt and Road Initiative is China's tool to achieve its Chinese dream of becoming, the world's most powerful economic, political, and military power. It's actually a conduit for neo-colonialism and the spread of totalitarianist ideas across the world. It's not just about trade. This is China expanding its influence beyond its borders all the way across the world. Therefore, it's crucial that governments across the world, organizations, and individuals push back against this, because originally this is how China invaded and occupied East Turkestan. They promised us, we're going to help you develop your country, we're going to help you build roads, we're going to help you do this, we're going to help you do that. The same promises that they're giving to Central Asian countries, the same promises that they're giving to Pakistan and to many countries across the world. And then initially, they'll build a few roads, but then they start bringing Chinese settlers, Chinese workers, and then these Chinese workers and these settlers start to, intermarry, sometimes coercively into the population, and undermine the political, economic, and social system of that country. And then ultimately, in the long run, what they will engage in is colonialism and replace, the original population to where they'll either put in weak-minded leaders of your own people to serve as puppets, while they send in, their Communist Party officials to, quote, guide you to the right path, and you'll be stuck in a situation where we are facing in East Turkestan and Tibet today, where millions of your people will be locked up in concentration camps, and your culture, your identity will be completely eroded. So it's my opinion that the international community opposes the Belt and Road Initiative, and by doing that, they can ensure the independence of East Turkestan, Tibet, and ensure that the Communist Party is not able to become this monster, which it already is, but not to where it will threaten the very existence of the global community.
Hi, Tarki. So my first question to you is that we all know that Chinese Communist Party, they have all religious institutions as breeding grounds for dissent, and they have retaliated with greater restrictions and control. And one such policy is patriotic re-education, especially for the monks and nuns. Can you throw some light on this, aspect, especially how their policies have kind of restricted religious activities in Tibet?
Okay. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to represent Tibet. Since Xi Jinping assumed leadership in 2012, he has introduced a series of religious policies, in which he has especially emphasized on the Sinicization of religions in China and in its occupied countries like Tibet and East Turkestan. So the Sinicization of religions in China and occupied countries basically, talks about how religions in China and the minority religions to be incorporated into a larger Chinese state discourse. That is, they have the state has also implemented, sub activities like imposition of, many rules and regulations in nunneries and monasteries across Tibet. So one of them is implementation of four standards. The four standards, it's the rules. It's rules that focuses on nuns and monks to be politically reliable citizens. To speak to for the nuns and monks are to be politically reliable citizens to help maintain so-called stability in Tibet. So they are also given titles such as Mormon monks and nuns, to mainly to influence the Tibetan lay masters and other monastic religious subjects. So yeah. So in another instances of the implementation of state's religious policy can be seen in Haringar and Yachingar, two of the most important Buddhist academy in Eastern Tibet. So these two academies have come under constant strict scrutiny since 2001, when Jiang Zemin was the president of the of China. So in recent years, starting from 2016, they have evicted many monks and nuns, in Yachingar and Haringar, and they have also demolished many of their quarters So why Yachingar and Harungar becomes very important because right after Cultural Revolution, their founders Yachingers and Harungars founded the Buddhist academic. Founders has established this solely to revive the lost Tibetan Buddhist culture. So, in that way, so many Tibetan nuns and monks across Tibet, including all three provinces of Tibet, have come to study and to really pursue their monastic education. But the Chinese state increasing intrusion into you know these spaces, monastic spaces, have really undermined the important religious values and ethos and principles of Tibetan Buddhism. So these are the how they have implemented this religious policy in China, in Tibet.
Thank you, Tashi.
Yeah.
Next question to you is that when the reincarnation process of His Holiness the Dalai Lama is taking place, what role do you think the Tibetan diaspora is going to play in this with the time that process is taking place? And when I say Tibetan diaspora, I don't mean only in India, because the large diaspora that is present around the world.
So in 2011, when His Holiness the Dalai Lama devolved his political authority to the democratically elected president of Tibetan government in exile, the CTA, Central Tibetan Administration, he has done this with a vision that in future Tibetan youth will take charge of the Tibetan movement. So, although there is an increasing interference of the Chinese state in the reincarnation process, so there has been a lot of an increasing interference by the Chinese state into this whole reincarnation process. But the Tibetan diaspora, the Tibetan diaspora, especially Tibetan youth, have become very politically conscious in recent years, and they are really taking charge of the movement. So and Dalai Lama has also devolved his political authority with a vision really to to make Tibetan youth to lead all the Tibetan movement. So the Tibetan diaspora also plays very important role, as there are very many emerging Tibetan youth leaders who are taking charge of the Tibetan movement.
Right. So there's one quick question for Mr. Granaday. So the famines and rivers, in spite have bedeviled China for eons. Recently, food shortages in China are once again being talked about. So how bad is it on ground? So what is the situation for the Chinese regime in that regard?
There are three quick points that come to mind in response to your question. The first, of course, I think is well known that the Chinese are the world's biggest and, as they say, the best dam builders today. But apart from that, they have gone seemingly on a spree to build dams without really assessing the ecological and environmental costs that they may have to pay. So, for example, on the Mekong River, they have built a series of dams in order to try and divert the water to irrigate their own lands without bothering about the lower riparian states, despite their protests. But what has happened is that we are seeing huge floods in China thanks partially to those dams. Secondly, they have built large dams like, for example, the Three Gorges, which is today under threat. So if anything happens to it, or even if they are compelled to release the overflow of water, there will be over 1 million people who will be directly impacted. Now, what environmentalists say is that if there is a 2% rise in temperature, then China will face serious problems in terms of water levels rising, in terms of floods, etc. The third linked factor to some extent are the food shortages. A lot of the food is being wasted or being ravaged because of flooding. But more importantly, after COVID, China is facing serious problems. So this year, in fact, they are going in for the largest purchase ever, largest import ever of soya beans from the United States. There is also a possibility that, I am quoting the Chinese figures themselves, which have come out about a week or two ago, that they may have to import large quantities of grain from Canada and Australia. So China is in difficulty, though they are saying that they have got enough in stock for this year. But not if the stock was enough to last for about 2 years plus. So obviously there is a problem, but it's not desperate conditions yet for China. But this is something they have to remedy. They are caught between two compulsions, which is they have large areas of fertile ground in the north, but there is no water, which is why they are trying to divert the Brahmaputra to the north. They've already got, I think, 7 dams built on the Brahmaputra, that is the Yarlung Pangpo, plans to build 17 more. But what they're not decided about is whether to have one huge explosion on the Great Bend and then divert the Brahmaputra, or to build a series of dams and divert the Brahmaputra. That seems to be their problem. But in other words, what I'm saying is they are not really concerned about lower riparian rivers. They are looking at the immediate situation of food shortages to feed their people. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I have another question for Mr. Choi. The question is that given that China has consistently defied and flouted international laws and conventions, for instance, the UN CLOS over the SCS, what are the other options the world have to make China comply in case of Hong Kong?
I think there is many creative ways, not only just going through these convention international venue, for example, United Nations. It seems to me that a lot of these organizations by the United Nations have been under very strong influence by China already. So I think people can, be creative about that. For example, like in Hong Kong, we have the Yellow Economic Circle, and the people making their life, everyday life, as a way to express themselves and to tell the Hong Kong government or Chinese government that we are not very happy about that. So at the same time, I think the world can also do the same thing. That, for example, we are supporting some freedom-loving countries, for example, India or Taiwan or other countries, that we should actually encourage our people to buy stuff from them, or encourage the companies to manufacture the products in these countries. And then one way to do it is actually probably we can be creative about that, like creating a label on that, saying that, oh, these products are actually made in freedom-loving countries, and so that the consumer can actually identify these products and to buy it before they can think about that, and then before they actually buy it, and so that it can have an impact on the not only just politically but actually economically. I think there's a lot of ways that we can do about it, and people can just be creative. Yeah.
Right. There's one question for the Honorable Prime Minister. It's about demographic reconstruction. done by the Chinese. It has targeted other regions as well, like Tibet, and recently we have heard that it is happening also in Balochistan, where there is a heavy Chinese investment. So would it be wrong to expect an organized and unified actions by these areas targeted by the CCP?
No, I think we should cooperate, whether it's Tibet with Uyghurs or others. Anyone that opposes China should all cooperate together to target, to push back against the CCP. As I said, the CCP, it's much more than just communist. It's a ultra nationalist, communist dictatorship which wants to, create this world where it's dominated by the Chinese people, by the Han Chinese, and that's why they're engaging in neo-colonialism, not just inside East Turkestan and Tibet, but outside of the occupied territories, into Africa as well. In Balochistan, I mean, they're setting up Gwadar port and building this so-called city in which they're going to bring about 500,000 Chinese exclusively for this area. At this present moment, it might not seem like a great threat. It's like, oh, it's only 500,000. But you have to look at the big picture. 70 years from now, they're going to largely alter the demographics to where those people, the original owners of the land, are going to be at a risk of becoming minorities in their own land.
I would actually, because of the time constraint, I'm now moving on to the last question. It's a two-part question actually, and the question is for everyone here, each one of the speakers. The question basically is for the layman. It is very confusing to see China's hostile behavior to these regions and also to other neighbors. So one is, what according to you is the reason behind this behavior, and secondly, what exactly can India and Indians do to help these regions, as we say, which are under the shadow of the dragon? So Mr. Granaday, will begin with you. What is the reason behind China's behavior, and what can India and Indian diaspora do about it?
Thank you. It's certainly not an easy question, but let me just say that as far as China's neighbors are concerned, including India, we have to be conscious that despite whatever China may say, its designs are something else. As I said earlier, that they are talking about the rejuvenation of the great Chinese nation, which means recovery of all territory. Now, this seems to be a bit of an anachronism, because here you have a Chinese communist regime which, correctly speaking, should have shed all past baggage, particularly imperial baggage that it inherited. But what they have done is, they talk communism, but they have clung on to all their imperialist past, in fact added on more to it. So whenever the Chinese empire was at its largest, that is the boundary they have selected, and they're pushing to recover that. As far as the neighbors are concerned, they have only two recourses. If I may say, there have been a number of people, including the United States, who have always held out that China, as it becomes richer, as it comes more into the, shall I say, circle of other countries in the world, it will also follow the same norms, same civilized norms, and become a responsible power, in quotes. There were some who said that, who warned that China is not going to follow that path. The Chinese communist ambitions are quite different, and their goals are different. And I'm sorry to say that has now come to pass. I was one of those also who was very wary about what the Chinese are going to do. And we are seeing today this. The only time that the Chinese have held back is when they have seen another force which can contest power with them. So I think the lesson for us is that whether it's diplomatic, whether it's economic, whether it's military, countries around will have to push back, and it's only then that China will behave. We have all seen the way that they ignored the Permanent Court of Arbitration as far as the South China Sea is concerned. We have all seen how they've ignored the various agreements and treaties that they have signed with us. So I think it is only these actions that will contain China's expansion.
Right, Tashi, if you can hear us, I would like to come to you.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, right. So your take on why does the reasons behind China's behavior and what can common Indians and India as a whole do for this?
Well, I think China has occupied so many countries till now, and when they occupied Tibet in 1950s with Tibetans failed uprising in 1959. Their main aim was to is to really dismantle the Tibetan society, Tibetan culture, and establish their Han hegemony in in Tibet. So the reason that that they have occupied countries is to they want to appear a political giant in Asia, and their main aim is to really to establish themselves as a supremacist country which can rule other parts of Asia, and their main as we have seen how European countries have colonized so many countries in South Asia and many African countries. So it's the main reason is really to extract material wealth and establish themselves as a giant country. Yeah. And the Tibetan what India can do is to really especially for Tibet, to really back up the issue of Tibet in in every platform, and to as the House of Representatives in USA has introduced has passed a bill called the Tibet Policy Act bill, which rules out the interference of Chinese in of the China's in the reincarnation process. So, and also talks about the it gives talks about the religious freedom in Tibet. So what India can really do is to back up the issue of Tibet in and really we have been making a lot of appeals to the Indian government and Indian leaders for many years now. So it's important to really back up the issue of Tibet in international platform and to in parliaments and stuff. Yeah.
Right. Moving on to you, Craig. Your inputs on that.
I think there's a historical reason why China is behaving like this, because I think for the past 100 years, and China was seen as a victim of the colonization, and then after almost a century, then China suddenly becomes very strong and powerful in its economic might. It seems to me that the nationalism and the national pride becomes very overwhelming amongst these Chinese people. And that's why I think that's also explain a little bit psychologically why they are being so aggressive. And talking about what other countries and what they can do and to help other freedom of countries in Asia, I believe that there is a strong position in every country when they are forming this international treaty or international trade treaty with China. I think they can actually put into put in some human rights clauses in these treaties to at least ensure that human rights are conformed under the treaty. And apart from that, in the companies level, and inserting some human rights related, for example, labor rights or LGBT rights kind of clauses into these commercial deals with a Chinese company would also really definitely helping China or Chinese company to respect human rights and democracy or freedom. Yeah. Thank you.
Right. Right. Thank you, Greg. I would like to move to Namrata as well. Namrata has been studying China for a very long time. She had been studying it thoroughly, and from the Taiwan's point of view as well. So, Namrata, your input on this: what is the reason behind China's behavior, and what Indians can do about it?
Yeah. So I think what are the reasons? If you ask me, I think I'll take on from where Mr. Craig left. That of course there are historical reasons. The Chinese leaders have always talked about a century of humiliation that they faced, and that has, also kind of, given them a starting point as to also work on the Chinese nationalism. When they talk about all these things, and of course, as Mr. Granaday also pointed out in his opening speech, this whole China dream that especially, see, it's not a new thing. Of course, the way President Xi Jinping has laid it out, it is, of course, everybody's talking about it now, and, the US also reacted after it, especially the China-US trade war that started, but this is not something new. If you also look at leaders like Mao and, leaders after that, they have all spoken about it, and they have all used it. But yes, this term, of course, especially after the book that came in 2010, China Dream, and how President Xi Jinping has used and quoted from that book time and again, that kind of, this timetable, as Granaday sir pointed out, that he has given 2021, 2035 made in China, 2049, that they will be a global power. This gives you an insight why we see that they're having these multiple disputes with other countries, how they are using especially all these targets and also nationalism to stir. We all feel that Chinese Communist Party is this monolithic organization, and they really have nothing, because it's a one-party rule. They don't need any domestic. There are no domestic pressures, but there are domestic pressures, and nationalism always helps them achieve that. Now, the China dream is actually the dream of Chinese leaders. Not definitely, the Chinese people don't, see it that way. So they also have to use, certain things to stir this nationalism that is there. And, the reasons why it is, of course, at loggerheads with not only India, with Taiwan, South China Sea, East China Sea, all its neighbors, is achieving this, global this #1 position that it wants. It either wants to surpass the US or at least be where the US is. So, I see that whatever China is doing is, due to all this. And we have, today we've had discussions from Hong Kong, Tibet and Xinjiang. I mean, especially, on my own personal experience, I attended a conference in Taiwan. It was on security, and police officials from all over the world were there. I really don't know what I was doing in the conference, but I was there. And I asked a question about Uyghurs, and, from the representative of UAE. And straightforward, like the one line that he told me was, we don't sympathize with terrorists. Now, China has also used its economy, its 14 trillion economy, to, today, bury these, especially these issues that are there. How many people today talk about, were talking about Tibet, or they were talking about Xinjiang? So all this also, plays into that. I've met people from Hong Kong back in 2014 when I was, traveling across Taiwan. They told me that, there was 2 school teachers, and they told me that, a police complaint was filed against, especially all the women who were participating in that movement in their college, that they used their bodies to harm the policemen. So there are a lot of things that are happening, and what we see what is happening in Hong Kong, Tibet, Xinjiang, and also to neighboring countries like us. Now, what countries like India or what democracies can do? See, ultimately, if you ask me, when it comes to Tibet, yes, India has done quite a bit to support Tibet initially, and I think we are still doing it. But when it comes to Hong Kong or Xinjiang, especially Hong Kong now, if you see, I think once the issue is taken up by countries like US, UK, and there are people in exile who kind of, when they're talking about, having this parliament in exile, if that comes up and there is a lot of, countries like US and UK raise these issues at international platforms, I think India will definitely ultimately join the democracies in supporting these issues. And, when it comes to Xinjiang also, this whole, especially the 9/11 thing, the way, the Chinese have used that and, kind of built a platform, it is all the Chinese economic might. So, of course, countries all over the world, especially democracies, will do something about it. And, of course, they are doing about it. They have raised voices against it. A lot of countries have come out and made statements when it comes to Hong Kong and what is happening in Hong Kong. So, I think these things will pick up, and that's all I would say. Thank you.
Right, right. And moving on to you, Honorable Prime Minister, what are your thoughts on it? Because you had mentioned in an interview we did with you, Lokmanya did with you, about the people who began your movement. They had initially come to India and they had chosen India as one of their partners. So what can India and Indians do now? And your reasons for the overall behavior of China. Over to you, sir.
As far as the overall behavior of China, I mean, this is definitely historical, like Craig mentioned, like Amrata mentioned, but it's also geopolitical. I mean, China, it calls itself Zhongguo, which means the Middle Kingdom. This is something that didn't start today. I mean, this goes back thousands of years. They've always felt like they have this supremacy. They used to be number one, so they have to get back to that number one position. They are the center of the world in their own perception. So in order to rebuild their status as the, quote, center of the world or the number one position, that means claiming other people's countries, taking over other people's nations, engaging in neo-colonialism, and at all costs. It's ultimately strategic because China wants, in order to maintain this position, to become number one, it's going to have to, take over other people's lands. Because it needs the natural resources, it needs the mineral resources, it needs territory to settle its people, to feed its people. All of this requires, resources. And China doesn't have that internally within itself, so it invades and occupies East Turkestan. It invades and occupies Tibet. It's building up, islands and around the, I don't want to call it South China Sea because it doesn't belong to China. I mean, it belongs to multiple nations, and I like to call it the Southeast Asia Sea. They want to control the global economy and, take out any other competitor. And competitors in this realm are, the United States, India, Japan, especially in the Asia Pacific, maybe even Australia. So China is going to want to push back against that. As far as what the Indian government or what India can do to push back against this, I actually, the Kutneti just published an article, an op-ed that I wrote called "Why India Should Support East Turkestan and Tibet." And there I highlight, the reasons why, India should support East Turkestan and Tibet, but I'll get back to the main point on how they can support. So one of the things that India can do is to formally, recognize East Turkestan and Tibet as being occupied by China, and call on other nations to do so as well. They can recognize, formally the East Turkistan government in exile and the Tibetan government in exile, and to help improve upon and build new democratic institutions here in our diaspora. They can help educate and train future democratic leaders of East Turkestan and Tibet. These are all stuff that can be done at the present moment, and also encourage other countries to do so as well. Because the hostility of China is going to increase daily. It's not something that's going to go away. As Namrata mentioned, and as Granaday mentioned, we have to push back against China. Only once you push back against them, they'll understand. They'll back down. If we don't push back against them and we accept everything, that they do, and we're like, okay, let's come to the negotiation table, we'll negotiate with you. They will never uphold any of their negotiations, any of their treaties. They promised autonomy for East Turkestan, they promised autonomy for Tibet. None of that has been fulfilled. They've made numerous treaties with India over, the territory, India over Eastern Ladakh, and not, intrusion into India's territory. But China continues to do this again. Even with the Southeast Asia Sea, they promised, they're just going to grow peacefully and they're not going to violate other people's territorial sovereignty. But you see this again and again. And at one point, if the world doesn't push back, China is going to become this very powerful monster to where it will be very difficult for us to resist at that point.
Thank you so much, sir. I would like to specifically mention a couple of things. One is that we have had so many questions with us right now, more than a dozen questions with us, and unfortunately, because of the time constraint, we won't be able to take them all. But do mail it to us on our email ID, and we'll try to get it answered by the speakers that we have.
Meanwhile, Craig, can I ask you a question?
Sure, sir. Please go ahead.
Craig, I heard yesterday or the day before that 10 people trying to escape in a boat were captured. They were going to Hong Kong to somewhere. So what is the rule? I mean, aren't the residents of Hong Kong allowed to fly out or go by sea somewhere? Is there a freedom of their movement?
I think one of the reasons why they got caught was that because they actually charged. There was warrant and then they are on bail, and so they are not allowed to leave Hong Kong because they are under investigation by the Hong Kong police. One of them is actually investigated because of the national security law, and then others protesters and they have some charges against them because of their violation of others. Laws in Hong Kong because of the protests, and so that's why they are under the bail and they were not allowed to leave Hong Kong. And the reason why it is so controversial is that because they actually leave Hong Kong the sea territories, and then they enter into the China sea territories, and then they were intercepted by the Chinese sea police officers, and then they were sent back to China now. And then the problem now is that Hong Kong lawyers are we're facing the problems how to connect or contact with these arrestees in China as well. So I think a lot of the legal teams now is working on this case and try to get in touch with these people in Hong Kong.
And a follow-up to this is, Britain has been saying that you all are welcome to come to Britain and become citizens there. How many are really opting for it?
According to the UK government statistics, there are around 3 million Hong Kong people eligible to the British National Overseas status. So, but I do not think that most Hong Kong people will flood to the UK because after all, this is moving to another country is not easy. You have to have according to the policy, that you need to show that you can actually live in or support yourself in the United Kingdom. So not a lot of Hong Kong people may want to do that, and a lot of Hong Kong people, I believe, we still want to stay in Hong Kong as long as possible to fight our causes. Yeah.
If I can just add here a little bit to your comment that, this particular case where the 12 Hong Kong people were escaping or fleeing, whichever word you want to use, in that vessel, there is a strong suspicion that the Chinese authorities were aware of the plan and they allowed them to come out before intercepting them, because they intercepted them just 10 kilometers distance from Hong Kong. So people feel that it was, they're just waiting for them to get out and then catch them and charge them. So, second point about what you said, how many people will go. A lot of the wealthy people in Hong Kong in 1997, before they hand over, or before that, had already acquired passports and property in Canada, Australia, and USA, and to a lesser extent in UK. So they are already well taken care of. I think it's the rest who will have a problem, as say goes there.
So on behalf of, I think, the center as well as on behalf of Lokmanya, I take this opportunity to propose a vote of thanks to all the firstly attendees who are outside the stage. We must thank Jaydev Granaday for his very incisive remarks on initially in the keynote and subsequently during the question hour. I also want to thank our three esteemed speakers, the Honorable Prime Minister of East Turkestan in exile, Mr. Saleh Hudair, also Mr. Craig Choi and Tashi Chodron from Dharamshala. Thank you very much, and we look forward to maybe meeting you again in some other webinar on another topic. Thank you, and I wish all of you good health, good night, and a late good morning for the rest of you.
Thank you.
Thank you once again for joining, and as I mentioned, please email us any questions you have on contact@lokmanya.com. So thank you once again.